All right, it's time to check in with Indiana, the Indiana Hoosiers, who gave Illinois kind of a devastating loss last year. As Illinois played pretty well for most of that game, but 4 turnovers really cost them in Indiana with a great last drive to close out a game that looked like a pretty good win for Indiana way back in September. But let's talk about the Indiana Hoosiers, who are back on the Illinois schedule in November. Matthew Weaver covers Indiana football for Peegs.com, our great Indiana site at 24/7 Sports. So I'll start there, Matthew. After that Illinois win, what happened to Indiana? Because they started 3-0 and then just won one game the rest of the season. What happened?
Well, I mean, Connor Bazelak, who had a terrific, final drive there in that Illinois game, really kind of carved up a good defense to win that game there at the end. Really struggled, and it was kind of a square peg round hole. He was obviously not a very mobile guy. If you gave him protection, could throw the ball. And Indiana's offensive line was just so bad last year, to the point where Darren Hiller, the offensive line coach, was fired at about the midway point. I think actually exactly the midpoint after the 6th game, and then replaced former Northern Illinois coach Rod Carey, who was like an analyst on the staff, and he became the O-line coach the last half of the season. They've since brought in Bob Bostad, but just a bad fit. Offensively, they really struggled. If you look at the numbers, they were very poor. They could not run the ball. And then you had an immobile quarterback with an offensive line that couldn't protect him. So, it was a recipe for disaster. And then the defense would have moments of good play, but they were just on the field too long. And the defense had slipped. I mean, let's be honest, it wasn't where it was a couple years before. So it was, it wasn't just one side. There was a multitude. Special teams were pretty solid overall, but did have some mistakes in some games. Really hurt them in the I think it was the Nebraska game. It was one of those years where, it's honestly for Indiana, it's been kind of a lot of those years where you just had poor play from kind of both sides of the ball.
Well, Tom Allen, just a few years ago, he was 11-5 in the Big Ten from 2019 to 2020. He's gone 2-16 in the Big Ten since. So entering this 7th season for Tom Allen in Bloomington, how hot is his seat right now, Matt?
I think at a lot of schools, it would be pretty warm. The problem is after this season, he's still got 4 years left on his contract and a $20 million buyout. And at Indiana, and I mean, maybe Illinois is the same, but, at schools kind of like what we cover, that's a lot of money. I mean, they don't have the cash flow or whatever you want to, the war chest that maybe Ohio State or Michigan, or the impatience that some of those schools have with the people who are running it. So, but, if he goes, they got 2 wins on their schedule, Akron, Indiana State. You go 2-10 and you get drilled in most of those games, maybe there's a discussion. I think he's got 2 years. I think he'll get the 24 season as well. And like I said, barring a really, really bad collapse, the new president here is somebody that I've heard really wants football to be good. But, the bottom line is $20 million is a huge chunk of change, especially just a few years out of COVID, when athletic budgets are now just kind of getting back to that, break even point. So, there's some wrestling. I mean, Tom Allen is very well liked. He is. I know a lot of stuff seems kind of corny and whatever, the LEO, but he's a genuine guy. He's the kind of guy you would send your son to play football for, because he's going to make your son a better person. But you got to win. I mean, let's be honest. At the end of the day, this is a big money, bottom line. What have you done for me lately, business? And what he's done lately is 6-18, and like you said, I think 2-16 in the Big Ten. Even in Indiana, that's going to bring out some of the loud voices that when there a change needs to be made.
Yeah, Matt, the one thing I would say about Tom Allen, he really wants to be there. Like he loves Indiana. I mean, he's from there. He's spent a lot of time in the state. That's not going to happen with a lot of guys who apply for that job or are coaching candidates for that job. But it is a Big Ten job now, and you have money, you have all of that. So I do think it's probably a little bit more appealing than it was maybe 10 years ago with all the money and being a Power 2 conference. But I guess the big picture question here, Matt, is like Illinois, Indiana is a basketball school, but it has struggled to find success consistently on the gridiron. So how tough is this job, and what is the path to success, whether it's with Tom Allen or somebody else?
Well, I mean, it's tough. It's always going to be tough. I mean, in this state, You've got two other Power 5 schools, and Indiana does not produce. I mean, high school football is a lot better, and I always attribute that to when Peyton Manning came in, in the early 90s. He made football cool for high school kids who normally would just play basketball. But you've got Purdue and Notre Dame, and then other schools come here to recruit. Ohio State has come in and plucked some guys. Michigan will recruit here. So this is a state where they may not blanket it, but they'll come in and they'll try to pluck the top 3 or 4 guys who are legit players. So it's a tough job recruiting wise. They've really made their hay in the South and Florida. Obviously, they've been really heavy in the portal the last few years, like a lot of other schools have. You mentioned it, the money. That bottom line is right now, you get, what is it, 60, 70 million the Big Ten schools are going to be getting here or with this new deal. I think getting rid of the divisions really helps Indiana because basically when you're in the East, if you're not Michigan, Ohio State, or Penn State, you're looking at 3 losses before your season even starts. So you got to go 6-3 in your other 9 games to get to a bowl game. One of the problems Indiana's had is their scheduling. They have played Louisville. They're playing Louisville this year. They played Cincinnati last couple of years. If you're playing 4 non-conference games and 8 conference games, I'm okay with playing a Louisville or Cincinnati. When you've only got 3 bites at the apple, you need to play 3 games that when you walk on the field, your players are better than the other team's players. And that's not the case. So basically Indiana's playing 10 conference games. They're not trying to get into the playoffs, so they don't need to, make their schedule sexier. They need to get wins. I always go back to Bill Snyder in his book when he took over Kansas State. He said, get rid of these games and get me a bunch of patsies so we can get wins. And that's what Indiana needs. And getting rid of divisions will help. It's still going to be tough. It's not like they've been great against the West the last couple of years. They've won 2 games out of 18, and some of those were against West opponents. So it's not like it's going to be a cakewalk, but it does. Those teams are just so talented and so physical that when you play them, it's almost like you're playing 2 games. I mean, they just beat you up, and if you play them back to back, it's brutal. I mean, it really takes a lot of. And Indiana opens with Ohio State this year. I mean, they could open the season with a 30, 40-point loss. I mean, it's with some young players that could be tough mentally for them to overcome. So hopefully they can. It's not too bad, but it's not an easy job. I do think the way the media writes things, it does make it more appealing. I think you'd have a bigger pool of candidates, like you said, than you would 10 years ago. But it's still going to take the right guy. Indiana's better at investing in this program, but they're not to. I mean, look at Illinois' facility that they built a couple years ago, Iowa's facility, Purdue's facility. Those are the peers to me for Indiana. They need to get to that level, at least to that level. They're never going to get to the Ohio State or Penn State or Michigan level, most likely, but they need to be on the level with you guys in Minnesota and Iowa and Purdue, because that's who they're recruiting against. Those are the teams you're trying to beat for recruits. And obviously NIL plays a part, but so do facilities and things like that and infrastructure. So I think it's a little bit more appealing job, but it's still not, a destination. Let's put it that way. Unless you're like a Tom Allen.
Right. That's why I find him really interesting there. Indiana returns just 8 starters, and they lost several key players at the transfer portal. But as you said, Matt, they're bringing in 25 transfers to this team. How do you feel they came out of all of this? How did the roster settle out? Did they get even? Did they get ahead? Did they lose? What do you think?
I think on paper you can make the case, at least at something they came out ahead. I mean, I think Taven Jackson's a better quarterback than Connor Bazelak, but Connor Bazelak was a proven commodity. He had played in the SEC at Missouri. Taven Jackson basically is the guy, he played mop-up time at Tennessee. Now he's really talented. Brendan Sorsby, the kid that was a freshman last year from Texas, he played like a series or 2 against Penn State. He's got some talent, but they're really young at the most important position on the field. But I do like the talent they have there. I thought they did a really good job on the D-line, and that's the spot where we'll just look at Illinois. I mean, that defense is fantastic. Is it Jerzon and Newton? Yeah. I'll spoil it. I made even one of my top 5 players in the recent stuff we've done, for media. He's a fantastic player, NFL guy. But, Bielema has done a great job at Illinois. I think they haven't been super explosive. I look at the Penn State game, was it 2 years ago, where I can't remember how many yards they threw for. I think you guys ran for like 350 yards, whatever it was, and went into Penn State and beat them by basically just whipping their butts up front. And, that's where Indiana's really struggled with other teams, even the Illinois and some of those of the world where you think they'd be more on par. I think football, at the end of the day, you can have all the window dressing. At the end of the day, football is one up front. Whoever can physically whip the other team up front and impose their will is going to win most games. And they did a good job of the D-line. O-line, there wasn't a whole lot of spots. Bringing in Bob Bostad, I think, is huge. He did a great job with Wisconsin. I think he's a guy that can take, maybe marginal Big Ten recruits and coach them up. He did it at Wisconsin. Hopefully he can continue to do that in Indiana. But I think on paper, they came out ahead. Talent-wise, it's close. I would say I would lean towards a little bit ahead, but, on paper, that doesn't matter. It's what you do, on the field, obviously. So we'll see. I mean, the secondary to me is a big concern. So they're going to need the front seven to play well to kind of take the burden off those guys until they can get their feet under them.
So a lot will play out before Illinois and Indiana play each other towards the end of the season. But what do you think this team's, Indiana's, strengths are going into the year?
Offensively, you got some good skill players. Jalen Lucas is legit. He's a stud. The one issue with him, he's 5'8", 5'9", 170 pounds. So you want to try to reduce, he was fantastic as a returner last year, All-American, showed flashes of that kind of play as a running back. They just didn't give him the ball enough, but that's the line. How, you want to give him the ball enough to make a huge impact, but not too much where you get him beat up. And the last half of the season, he's not able to play that much. But I think they got some good skill players. The offensive line, I think, will be better. But then again, obviously, it couldn't be much worse. The first 6 games, they were just atrocious. They don't need to be top 3 or 4 in the Big Ten. They need to be top half. Enough of a running game and to take some of the pressure off these young quarterbacks who can make plays. But if Taven Jackson and or Brendan Sorsby, whoever wins the job, and that hasn't been decided yet, if it's put on their shoulders to win games, they're in trouble. They need to be put in a position where they have to make some plays, but not carry the team. And then defensively, I think the D-line is going to be a strength. I like the guys. Andre Carter from Western Michigan is really good. I think he's an NFL guy. They brought in some other guys. Linnell Carr from West Virginia. I think he's going to give them some pass rush help. Linebacker Aaron Casey's an all-conference type of player. Like I said, the secondary is the weak point. And then you got a great punter in James Evans. I know that's not a cool position to talk about, but it is important. And
after last year's Indiana game, Illinois knows how important punter is.
The question is their kicker's brand new, Nicholas Radicic, Army All-American, one of the best kickers, but he's a freshman, and it's a lot different kicking in high school, obviously, than come up here into college. So if it comes down to like a game-winning field goal, how's that going to go? But I tell people, if you could play the top 30 or 35 guys, I think Indiana's a bowl team. I think they can win 6 games. Unfortunately, you got to have 50 to 60 guys in college football, especially in the Big Ten. Depth to me is the question. If you have to go to your second guy or even your third guy, can they hold up? And obviously it's not going to be the same production, but is it going to be such a huge dip that it really hurts you?
So as you mentioned, inexperience at quarterback, O-line, secondary, are those the biggest question marks about this team?
Yeah, and O-line is actually pretty veteran group. I mean, there's guys who played quite a bit. But they just haven't played well. And I think, we'll see how they're, Matthew Bedford got hurt in that game against Illinois in I think it was like the first or second quarter, tore his ACL, and he was gone for the year, which is a huge loss. He'll be back. Zach Carpenter, the transfer from Michigan from a couple years ago. That Michael Kadick, they've got some guys, and they actually, Darren Hiller did recruit pretty well, even though he did not a great job developing, but that position has got to be better. But quarterback is the biggest question mark on offense by far. And then, in my opinion, the secondary on defense.
Matthew, what would make this a successful season for Indiana?
Well, I mean, getting back to a bowl game. I mean, but, like I said, you got to go 6-3. And, one of those games, excuse me, 7 of those 9 games are they're not basically, they're Power 5 teams. You got, the 6 conference games and then the game against Louisville. So it's not going to be easy. You're going to have to find a way. I'm just kind of looking at their schedule right now. Rutgers at home. I mean, it's probably got to be a win. Wisconsin, I think, is going to be, pretty good. I think Fickle's a fantastic coach. I think they hit it out of the ballpark with him. I will see how soon, he can work his magic there. Michigan State's going to be an interesting team for me because they were so good 2 years ago and then really fell off last year. Purdue, they went the complete opposite direction with their coach. They have been all offense for years, and then they go, with Walters, who you guys obviously know really, really well, and it'll be interesting. You just don't know what to expect from him because he's never been a head coach. So, these are some of the games they have to get. Illinois could be a big game for them, and it's not going to be an easy game, but that's a game where they may have to try to find a way to go into Champaign and pull off a win if they want to get to 6. So, it's. If you could get 5 and 7, I know I hate to say this because it just feels like you're, settling, but you're really competitive. I think that would give people hope going into 24 with this program because there are going to be a number of guys back and you could have something to build on. But if you go 3-9, 2-10, and you're getting drilled, the wind has really come out of the sails of those 2 years you mentioned earlier. This program would kind of be almost, DOA.
I do want to say Indiana has beaten Illinois 4 straight times. They don't play each other very often, Matt, but they beat Illinois last year.
I remember the last game there. I think they hit Semi Cobbs late in the fourth quarter. I was standing on the sideline there. They threw, and that was kind of a pillow fight. I don't think either team was all that great. So it was, we showed up because we were getting paid to kind of deal. But they have had some success, and it's always been interesting. With the division split, it's a game I miss just because it's close by, and Illinois has always kind of been a rival of Indiana on the hardwood. So
I was going to ask you, do you think Indiana-Illinois should have been a protected rivalry in football?
I think you can make a strong case for it. Yeah, absolutely. I think you can make a really good case. Obviously, Indiana and Purdue is always going to be a rivalry. But yeah, I think you could. I mean, maybe it's because I'm looking at it from the basketball, but I remember as a kid some of those great matchups with Henson and Bob Knight, and they had the Flying Illini in the late 80s, and Indiana had some really good teams around that same time when they had Chaney and those guys. And so, maybe it's not the same, obviously not the same for football, but I know these are two fan bases that kind of go back and forth, and they seem to be over the years kind of equal, and that's, the football and basketball. So, obviously basketball for Indiana, except for a few years, over the last 20 years, it's been mediocre. Right. It's been better lately, but Illinois has got a great coach over there in Underwood. So, I would like to see them play more often. And for one, it's a closer trip, and we can stop by at the Beef House and get a good meal. Either going there or coming home.
That's right. Matthew Weaver, pigs.com. Appreciate the time, Matthew, and we'll talk to you again once the season gets going, man.
Okay, look forward to seeing you. What does it be? November 11th. November 11th. Wow, just before Thanksgiving. So, yeah, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.